The Siege of Krishnapur by J.G. Farrell. Read by Tim Pigott-Smith. The first sign of trouble at Krishnapur came with a mysterious distribution of chapatis made of coarse flour and about the size and thickness of a biscuit. Towards the end of February 1857, they swept the countryside like an epidemic. One evening, in the room he used as a study, the collector, Mr. Hopkins, opened a dispatch box and, instead of the documents he had expected, found 4 chapatis. After a moment's surprise and annoyance, he called the khansama, an elderly man who'd been in his service for several years and whom he trusted. He showed him the open dispatch box and the chapatis inside. The khansama's normally impassive face displayed shock. He stared at the purple dispatch box for some moments before picking the chapatis out of it respectfully. The collector, with a frown, gestured to him to remove the wretched things. A little later, he overheard the khansama shouting at the bearers, evidently convinced that they were responsible for a reckless practical joke. The collector was busy at that time. In addition to his official duties, which had been swollen and complicated by the illness of the joint magistrate, he had a number of domestic matters on his mind. His wife, too, had been in poor health for the past few months, and must now be sent home before the hot weather. It's unlikely, given his other preoccupations, that the collector would even have noticed the second pile of chapatis, had his eye not been led towards them by a column of ants. Their thin column passed within a few inches of his shoes on its way to the chapatis. Again, there were 4 of them, and they had been left on the top step of the brick portico which provided the main entrance to the residency. The collector had stepped out onto the portico for a breath of air. He hesitated for a moment, but then he noticed the sweeper working not far away. No doubt the chapatis on the portico were the property of the sweeper. The collector went inside again, dismissing the matter from his mind. The following afternoon, however, he found 4 more chapatis. This time they were not in his study, but on the desk in his office, neatly arranged beside some papers. Though there was still nothing very menacing about them, as soon as he saw them, he knew, beyond doubt, that there was going to be trouble. The collector was a large and handsome man. He wore low side whiskers, which he kept carefully trimmed, but which nevertheless sprouted out stiffly like the ruff of a cat. He dressed fastidiously. The high collars which he habitually wore were sufficiently unusual in a country station like Krishnapur to make a deep impression on all who saw him. He was a man of considerable dignity, too, with a keen but erratic sense of social proprieties. Disturbed, and having now forgotten the reason he had gone to his office in the first place, he made his way slowly back towards the hall of the residency, wondering whether certain measures might be taken to palliate the effects of this approaching, but still hypothetical, trouble, or even to avoid it altogether. Just supposing that serious trouble should break out in Krishnapur, an insurrection, for instance, where could we find shelter? Could the residency, merely as a matter of interest, of course, be defended? As he stood in the hall pondering this question, the collector experienced a sensation of coolness and great tranquillity. During the daytime, the light here came from a great distance. It came between the low arches of the veranda, across cool flagstones, through the green louvered windows let into the immensely thick walls, and at last, in the form of a pleasant reflected twilight, to where he was standing. One felt very safe here. The walls, which were built of enormous numbers of the pink wafer-like bricks of British India, were so very thick you could see yourself how thick they were. The residency was more or less in the shape of a church, that is, if you can imagine a church which one entered by stepping over the